The ball exploded through the air like a gunshot. The sharp crack of the glove was so loud that, for a second, the entire stadium held its breath. That day wasn't just another fastball. It was the roar of a monster the baseball world had never heard before. No one was ready, not the fans, not the analysts, not even Major League Baseball. His name is Roki Sasaki, and behind his superhuman arm lies a story that hurts more than any defeat. A child who lost his family to a tsunami, who watched his city vanish from the map, and who decided to turn pain into fire. How does one transform tragedy into a gift? How does a boy marked by loss become the most feared pitcher on the planet? Japan, 2011. The earth shook as if the world itself were splitting in two. In Iwata Prefecture, a wall of water swept away everything in its path. Houses, cars, schools, memories. Roki was only 9 years old when the tsunami destroyed his home and took his father and grandparents. What remained was silence, an emptiness impossible to fill. Yet in the midst of that silence, something inside him refused to die. His mother, desperate, took him to a shelter where they slept on thin mats for weeks. There, amid the cold and the smell of dried seawater, Roki looked up at the sky and whispered that he would become someone important, that one day his name would mean something. Years later, that promise would come true. At Ofunado High School, the quiet boy began throwing baseballs that sounded different. His arm moved like a whip, his mechanics flawless. Coaches couldn't understand how that skinny kid could reach speeds that shattered Japan's youth records. By 17, he was already throwing fastballs over 100 miles per hour. But beyond the speed, there was something in his eyes. It wasn't the usual ambition of a young athlete. It was a dangerous calm, the kind of calm found in someone who has already met disaster and fears nothing. During every practice, while others rested, Roki stayed behind, repeating his motion against the ocean wind. It was his way of speaking to his lost father, his way of promising to make him proud. In 2019, 4 Japanese league teams wanted him. It was the most anticipated draft in the country. In the end, the Chiba Lotte Marines won the lottery for his rights. That's how the legend of the monster of Iwate began. But not everyone was pleased. Many claimed that no young body could handle that level of strain. Others said his talent was so immense that the media pressure would destroy him. His first professional year was one of patience. The team chose to protect him, to limit his pitches and slowly build his endurance. Some fans grew restless. They wanted to see the fire live. But Sasaki understood the weight. He knew that to build something indestructible, one must first master patience. Then came 2021, the year of eruption. His fastball reached 165 kilometers per hour. His splitter, a pitch that seemed to defy gravity, began humiliating batters. All of Japan started following him with devotion, and then came the day that changed everything. April 10th, 2022, Chiba versus Oryx. A stadium filled with tense silence. Sasaki stepped onto the mound with inhuman serenity. He pitched 9 perfect innings, 19 strikeouts, 13 in a row. A historic record. Not a single batter reached first base. He was 20 years old and had just done what only a chosen few ever achieve in their entire careers. Japan bowed before him, but the most astonishing part wasn't the perfect game, it was what came after. 7 days later, he pitched again. 8 more perfect innings. They pulled him out before the 9th to protect his arm. He had retired 52 consecutive batters, a world record, yet behind that glory lingered a question. How long could an arm like that last? The human body isn't built to throw that fast. Was Japan creating its hero or its martyr? The media called him Otani's heir, the ultimate prodigy, the future of baseball. But Sasaki rarely spoke. Every word he uttered was measured as if he threw sentences the same way he threw pitches, with lethal precision. Behind that perfect image was a young man who still dreamed of his father, who felt the weight of an entire nation pressing down on his right shoulder. And yet, every time he stood on the mound, he looked like a calm samurai. His gaze held no fear, only purpose. Tension in Japan grew. MLB scouts were watching. Representatives from every team traveled just to see him. They knew it was only a matter of time before he crossed the Pacific. And when that happened, the baseball world would never be the same. But was he truly ready to leave his country, his story, his past? Could he withstand the pressure of a league that devours talent? Or would he become the perfect example of what happens when an extraordinary body is tested by a machine that never stops? The answer was about to arrive. Roki Sasaki's leap into professional Japanese baseball had been meteoric, but his true test was only just beginning. The young man who had conquered a nation now had a new obsession, conquering the world. In every interview, he spoke little, almost nothing. He smiled politely, but his eyes were fixed on something greater. It wasn't enough to dominate Japan. He wanted to challenge the highest standard in baseball, Major League Baseball. As his fame grew, so did the rumors about his departure from Japan. The Dodgers, the Yankees, the Mets, they all wanted him. He was the kind of talent you don't manufacture, the kind that appears once in a generation. Yet Roki did not rush. Japan was his school, his homeland, and he knew he still had to learn how to master pressure before facing the media storm of the United States. By 2023, NPB hitters already knew that facing him was a nightmare. His fastball exceeded 167 kilometers per hour, and his splitter dropped with surgical precision. The best hitters could barely touch the ball. It was as if he pitched with restrained fury, as if each throw exorcised the pain of his past. But that perfection came at a cost. His body began to send signals, days of shoulder discomfort, nights of ice and silence. The medical staff watched closely. They knew they were dealing with a fragile gem. The coaches insisted on limiting him, but Sasaki himself wanted more. Ambition was both his fuel and his curse. In the winter of 2024, after another season dominating the Japanese league, his destiny changed forever. On November 9th, he was officially posted to be negotiated with MLB teams. Within hours, the name Roki Sasaki became a global trend. He was the phenomenon everyone had been waiting for, the miracle kid who would finally cross the ocean. On January 22, 2025, he signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The news made headlines around the world. The contract seemed small compared to his true value, just a few $1,000,000 due to international transfer rules, but it represented something symbolic. Japan was handing its monster to the world's most demanding stage. In March of that same year, his debut came in the Tokyo series against the Chicago Cubs. It was a historic moment, debuting in his home country but wearing a foreign jersey before a crowd torn between pride and nostalgia. The stadium trembled. Every movement of his was watched by millions of eyes, and every breath seemed to carry its own weight. Sasaki took the mound with an impassive face. In the first inning, he allowed a run. His control was shaky, his pulse barely trembling. 5 walks, 3 strikeouts, a mix of fury and humanity. It wasn't a perfect debut, but it was a statement. The monster had stepped through the door. In the following weeks, his learning curve was steep. MLB hitters were not easily intimidated. Some waited him out, others studied him closely. The language, the cameras, the travel, the rhythm, everything was different. Still, every one of his pitches made news. In his first season, he racked up over 20 strikeouts and an ERA that, while inconsistent, showed flashes of brilliance. But fate, once again, reminded him that nothing would come easy. In May, discomfort in his right shoulder forced him to stop. The diagnosis? Inflammation from overuse. For a pitcher with his history, it was a red alert. The Dodgers placed him on the injured list. Roki took it calmly, but there was fire in his eyes. He knew it was part of the price that greatness demands. He spent weeks in silence working with physiotherapists, watching games from the bench. He studied every detail, every motion from veteran starters, every mistake, every trick. He wanted to absorb it all. And when the doctors finally cleared him to throw again, he returned with an almost inhuman determination. In September, he stepped onto the mound again, this time as a reliever. It wasn't his preferred role, but he understood the need to regain rhythm. His first outing was brief, just 2 innings, but enough to make one thing clear: his fire was still alive. The Los Angeles crowd cheered him as if a superhero had returned home. The American press began to understand that Roki Sasaki wasn't just a sports phenomenon. He was a living story, a symbol of resilience. A boy who had survived disaster and, against every statistic, was now pitching in the toughest league on earth. Yet deep down, the tension remained. Could his body withstand the demands of MLB? Could he bear the weight of an entire nation's pride? Or would he become another prodigy who burns out before fulfilling his promise? Meanwhile, in Japan, fans watched every game at dawn. They followed him as if he were a national cause. When he struck batters out, social media flooded with messages of pride. When he faltered, headlines shielded him gently. "Our Roki is still learning," they said. He was more than a player. He was a symbol. And at that point, the story opened a new loop. The loop of global fame. Social media turned him into a phenomenon. Clips of his pitches played on endless repeat, viewed millions of times. His face appeared in memes, highlight reels, sports debates. He was loved, criticized, analyzed. He was no longer just an athlete, he was content. The internet amplified his legend, but also his vulnerability. Every gesture became news, a smile, a grimace, a mistranslated phrase, and he, so private and reserved, had to learn to coexist with constant exposure. Some said that the real monster wasn't on the mound, but in the lights that chased him day and night. The story was far from over. Roki Sasaki was only beginning to write the hardest chapter of his life, proving that pain, glory, and pressure could coexist within a single body without breaking it. Roki Sasaki's return marked a before and after, not only for his performance, but for how his presence changed the atmosphere of baseball itself. Every time he took the ball, silence swept across the stadium. It was as if time stopped, as if everyone knew they were about to witness something unrepeatable. Yet behind that almost mythic image stood a 23-year-old still battling his own shadows. His teammates on the Dodgers described him as an obsessive perfectionist. He arrived earlier than anyone else, analyzed every motion on video, studied hitters with an almost unsettling focus. Some admired him, others felt uneasy around his intensity. For Roki, the word rest didn't exist. If his shoulder hurt, he hit it. If his body begged for a pause, he thought of his father, of the sea that had taken him away, and threw again. His coach, aware of his story, tried to stop him. He spoke to him about longevity, balance, the importance of protecting his body, but how do you stop someone who has made pain their fuel? For Sasaki, pitching wasn't just competition, it was survival. That summer, he faced the Yankees. It was a media spectacle, the perfect storyline, the young Japanese phenom versus the historic power of American baseball. In the first inning, he struck out the leadoff batter with a 102-mile-per-hour fastball. The crowd roared. Then came the splitter. Invisible. Impossible. The second hitter didn't even move. At that moment, the commentator said a line that went viral, "We are witnessing the future, and the future knows no fear." But the euphoria didn't last. In the fourth inning, after a high pitch, his expression changed. His arm dropped a fraction slower than usual. The coach rushed to the mound. Absolute silence. Cameras caught Sasaki gritting his teeth. He didn't want to leave. His pride was greater than the pain. Eventually, they pulled him from the game. It wasn't a serious injury, but it was enough for the world to once again wonder if the human body can withstand so much fire. That day, the crowd gave him a standing ovation as he walked off the field, not for the strikeouts, but for what he represented. The struggle between glory and sacrifice. That was the moment Roki Sasaki stopped being just a sports phenomenon. He became a symbol. During his recovery, the media took the opportunity to retell his story from the beginning. Japanese newscasts aired documentaries showing footage of the tsunami, his childhood, his mother, his first school games. On social media, millions shared words of encouragement. His entire country embraced him without touching him. And meanwhile, Roki was writing in his notebook. He did it every night. Short phrases, thoughts, promises. Some journalists who gained access to his notes revealed that one page read, "Pain is the most honest teacher." Another, further down, simply said, "I didn't come this far to give up." His comeback was planned with surgical precision. Not one pitch more, not one day sooner than scheduled. But when he stepped back onto the mound, something in him had changed. It was no longer about speed. Now it was about control, intelligence, strategy. Each pitch carried a message. He no longer threw to prove himself, he threw to endure. And that's when the Dodgers discovered something fascinating. Sasaki was learning to master the game in a new way, not just with power, but with mind. He no longer needed to hit 102 miles per hour to intimidate. All it took was a look from the mound. His mere presence was enough to unnerve the batters. However, amid that athletic rebirth, Roki began to face a different kind of battle, a media war. In the United States, some critics started questioning his discipline, doubting his durability. They said he was too Japanese, too methodical, too rigid. They compared him to other Asian pitchers who had failed to adapt to the rhythm of MLB. He didn't respond. Every word he left unspoken was a statement of character. Instead of defending himself, he let his arms speak for him. But the echoes of those criticisms followed him, and more than once his expression revealed the weight he tried to hide. Meanwhile, in Japan, he was defended as a national hero. Broadcasts began with the phrase, "Our Roki against the world." T-shirts, documentaries, books, even a biopic in production. They had turned him into a living myth. But myths don't sleep, don't complain, don't rest. And that constant pressure, the burden of never being allowed to fail, began to erode him. In a post-game interview during the regular season, a journalist asked if he had ever thought about giving up. Roki smiled faintly and said, "I survived the sea. Everything else is just a game." The line became a social media anthem. It appeared on banners, tattoos, stadium signs. It summed up his philosophy. If life had already taken so much from him, fear of failure was the one thing he could not afford. As the season progressed, his performance stabilized. He wasn't the flawless robot some imagined, but a pitcher who was learning to understand his own power. In some games, he touched perfection. In others, he showed his humanity. And it was precisely that, his humanity, that finally won over the American crowd. He wasn't just a prodigious arm. He was a living story. Every time he climbed the mound, fans felt they were witnessing something beyond baseball, a testament to endurance. And so, the boy who once slept among ruins, who wept before the sea that swallowed his childhood, now stood before tens of thousands, throwing not only baseballs, but messages, reminding the world that monsters sometimes aren't born from power, but from pain. Today, when Roki Sasaki looks back, he knows his story isn't merely that of a baseball prodigy. It's the story of a survivor who turned tragedy into purpose. The boy who once gazed at the ocean in fear now faces crowds with a calm that's almost unsettling. There's still something of that child from Iwate in his eyes, but also a determination that seems unearthly. His career is only beginning, and yet he already carries the weight of a legend. Experts speak of his potential to become the greatest pitcher of his generation. But what few understand is that, for him, victory isn't measured in trophies or statistics. His greatest triumph was never giving up. Roki knows baseball can be cruel. One day you're global news, the next you're a forgotten headline on an old page. He's seen it happen to others. But his strength doesn't lie in his arm. It lies in his mind. In that serenity, he learned when the world was collapsing and he kept breathing. The true revelation of his story is that talent without purpose fades. He found in his father's memory the reason that drives him. Every fastball he throws is a conversation with a past that never left, a dialogue with the silence of those who are gone. That's why his pitches aren't just technique, they're catharsis. And perhaps that's why MLB still isn't ready, because they don't know how to face someone who doesn't play for fame or money, but for redemption. Roki isn't trying to defeat rivals, he's trying to defeat fate. In a sport where numbers define everything, he reminds the world that some things can't be measured. As American fans watch as Japanese youth imitate his stance, the monster keeps evolving. But he's no longer a monster in the dark sense. He's a force of inspiration, proof that pain can become fuel, that loss can turn into legacy. His story transcends sports. It reminds us that behind every prodigious talent, there's a human being struggling to stay standing. That heroes tremble too. That perfection doesn't exist, and that's precisely what makes them great. The internet turned his name into myth, but also into a mirror. Millions of young people who once thought they couldn't rise again now see him and understand that failure isn't the end. It's the starting point. In every shared clip, every comment, every ovation, there's more than admiration. There's hope. And so, as the stadium roars and the camera focuses on his serene face, Roki Sasaki takes a deep breath, looks up to the sky, and throws. The sound of the glove echoes, and for a moment everyone understands they are witnessing more than a game. They are watching a man who defied fate and won. His journey doesn't end here. There are seasons ahead, challenges, victories, defeats. But the message is already written. Even when everything seems lost, there is always a way to start again. Share your thoughts. Do you know another story this inspiring? Which other MLB player should I explore next? And if you believe this story shouldn't remain untold, subscribe, comment, and share this video. Because the world must know that sometimes monsters aren't born to destroy, they're born to inspire.